I walked into the restaurant that night, with a neat suit and a frightening calm in my eyes. There was no fear, anger or hesitation, just the cold certainty that everything would change in that instant. There they were, in the most discreet corner of the room, exchanging knowing smiles, looks that she used to reserve just for me. For a second, I almost felt out of place, like I was the intruder in that romance scene. I could almost forget why I had come there. But then, my hand tightened on the envelope in my pocket and reality hit me like a punch. I walked up to the table, watching each expression change as they noticed my presence. He was surprised, a little alarmed, as if he couldn't believe that the show had been invaded by someone who hadn't received an invitation. Hers, incredulous and, at the same time, terrified. I knew what that meant. She tried to smile, get up, perhaps thinking that she could, with some excuse, turn that nightmare into a casual encounter, but I was faster. Good evening. I hope I'm not interrupting anything important. My voice sounded colder than I imagined. Before she could respond, I took the envelope out of my pocket and placed it on the table, right in front of her. This is for you. I think the time has come. She hesitated for a moment, her eyes wide, refusing to look at what was in front of her. What is that? His voice shook, a little strangled, perhaps trying to maintain his composure. The lover beside her shifted uncomfortably, looking at me, at her, at the envelope. He didn't know what to say, and I didn't want to hear anything from him. It's a divorce, I replied, my voice cutting through the air like a sharp blade. The silence that followed was deafening. Her gaze flickered between the envelope and my face, and I could see the plea beginning to form. I want to talk, she finally said, her eyes watering with desperation as she tried to find some semblance of empathy in me. Please listen to me. But there was nothing left to listen to. The whispers of empty apologies I imagined she would bring were far from meaning anything. I knew what I had seen, and she knew what she had done. For weeks, maybe months, she had been trying to trick me. Every kiss, every touch, all those nights when I felt something was wrong, it all made sense now. She was playing a game, and I had been the perfect pawn. Until now. She tried to grab my hand, tears streaming down her cheeks, desperation evident in every line of her face. I made a mistake, she sobbed, but it's not too late. We can fix this, please. His voice shook, breaking like thin glass, but my heart had already hardened beyond the point of return. Isn't it too late? I almost laughed at the irony, but my smile came out bitter. Too late was when you decided to go out with him for the first time. Too late was when you started lying to me, betraying my trust. Too late was every time you thought you could trick me and get away with it. Her lover was still there, motionless, barely breathing, not knowing whether he should intervene or simply curl up in the chair and pretend he wasn't seeing what was happening. What I didn't expect was what came next. It wasn't just her tears that flowed, but a revelation I never would have predicted. She wasn't just a traitor, she too had been betrayed. The man sitting next to her, the man she had risked everything for, had secrets of his own. She, who thought she controlled the game, had been just another piece in his strategy. I thought I had come here to close a chapter, but I realized I was just beginning to unearth something much bigger and dirtier than I imagined. While she cried and begged, trying to save a marriage that was already in ruins, he looked at her from the side, impassive, almost as if he was studying the best way to get out of that situation. The truth is, he never cared. Not with me, not with her. And it was then that I realized, her betrayal wasn't the end, it was just the tip of the iceberg. He used her, manipulated her every step, all with a calculated purpose that she was only beginning to understand now, between sobs and tears. Did you really think he loved you? I asked, looking directly at her. Because he was with you, and it wasn't out of love. He wanted something from me, and you were just the easy way out. She looked at me, confused, desperate to understand what I meant, and I continued, I know what you were doing, I know what he wanted. He wanted access to me, and you handed it to him on a plate. "No, that can't be true," she murmured, her voice barely audible, as if she were trying to deny reality itself. But I saw the look in his eyes. I saw how his eyes narrowed, how the mask of indifference broke for a second, revealing what I already knew. And then, as if he realized the charade was over, he stood up from his chair, trying to leave before everything collapsed around him. "Going somewhere?" I asked, blocking his path, and the tension in the air nearly exploded. "Because I think we have some things to sort out before you go anywhere." The table, the restaurant, the entire carefully assembled setting for a romantic evening turned into a silent battlefield. She continued to cry, and all I could think about was how much I had been deceived, not only by her, but by the entire scheme that revolved around that betrayal. And deep down, there was a question that still consumed me: how far had they gone? What else didn't I know? I had uncovered the betrayal, but the deeper I dug, the more dirt I would find. That dinner was just the beginning of a truth that I was finally ready to face, no matter what the cost. Welcome to our channel, where we expose the devastating consequences of betrayal. Here, we do not and will never support any type of infidelity. The stories are fictional, but they reflect a cruel reality: betrayal destroys lives, trust and dreams. Get ready for an intense and shocking narrative that will keep you hooked from beginning to end. Take a deep breath, and enjoy the story. The restaurant, lit by soft lights and tables decorated with elegant flowers, had the kind of atmosphere that would make anyone think of romance. It was a sophisticated place, the perfect place for celebrations, meetings, and promises. And it was there that, years ago, Ethan and Claire celebrated their wedding anniversary, toasting to a life of love and complicity that seemed unbreakable. But that night, as the tables filled with smiling couples, the feeling in the air was different. There was something dark and dense, like a storm about to break, and Ethan knew that feeling was coming from deep within him. Ethan was a respected businessman known for the meticulous way he managed his technology company. Meticulous was also a good adjective to describe his personal life. He was an organized man, who dedicated himself to details, who liked to plan surprises for Claire and who made a point of being a present husband. Claire always said he was the pillar of their relationship, the one she could lean on when things seemed uncertain. They met at college, and since then, life with him was a straight line, without abrupt curves, without major surprises, just the solidity of a routine built with patience and affection. Claire, on the other hand, was Ethan's opposite in many ways. She had a freer, lighter nature, a spontaneity that he admired and that made him feel alive. She was an artist who spent hours in her studio painting vibrant, colorful canvases, full of emotions. For her, art was an escape, a way to express the things she couldn't say in words. Ethan has always been proud to support her career, encouraging her to follow her dreams and explore her creativity without fear. They were the perfect balance, or at least that's what he believed. But recently, something had changed. Claire was more distant, absent, and seemed lost in thought. Ethan noticed the blank stares, the way she smiled without really smiling, and it made him uneasy. He would ask her if everything was okay, and she would always say yes, that it was just work, a new project that was taking up her time. She said she was trying to explore a new artistic phase, something more introspective, deeper. And as much as Ethan wanted to believe that, there was a part of him that couldn't ignore the discomfort. He found himself watching her when she didn't notice, trying to decipher what was different, but she always slipped away, like a shadow. The truth is that, during the last few months, Ethan's life seemed to have gone off the rails in a subtle, almost imperceptible way. Little things that once made sense now seemed disconnected, as if an invisible thread had snapped. Claire arrived home later, said she had meetings with other artists and displayed a rush that he didn't recognize. But whenever he asked, she would reassure him with sweet words, and Ethan felt like maybe she was overreacting, maybe it was just the stress and paranoia built up from work. They still had their moments together, but even those moments had changed. It wasn't like before, when they laughed for no reason, got lost in late-night conversations or planned spontaneous trips for the weekend. Now there was a formality, a subtle distance that made Ethan uneasy. He tried to reconnect, brought flowers, suggested dates and insisted on romantic dinners to rekindle the flame that he felt was fading. Claire, however, seemed to avoid these moments, as if she were distracted, absent in a world of her own. And whenever he tried to pull her back, she escaped like a bird that, despite having free wings, refused to fly into the cage he offered. There was a particularly strange night when Ethan was lying in bed waiting for Claire to return. He had called her a few hours earlier, suggesting dinner, but she refused, citing an important meeting with a group of artists to discuss a new exhibition. Ethan had tried to be understanding, but something in his voice made him uneasy. He tossed and turned in bed for hours, staring at the ceiling, trying to banish thoughts that he himself considered irrational. When he finally heard the sound of the keys turning in the lock, he waited for Claire to enter the room with that tired smile of someone who had had a long day at work. But when she appeared, there was something different. The smell of a perfume he didn't recognize, the sparkle in her eyes that didn't match tiredness, and the smile she tried to hide as soon as she saw him awake. "Hi, love. Still awake?" she said, as if trying to get rid of any suspicion. Ethan didn't know what to say. There were so many questions he wanted to ask, but they all died in his throat. He replied yes, that he had been waiting for her, and Claire smiled and went straight to the bathroom, as if wanting to avoid any confrontation. When she returned, the scent of perfume was gone, replaced by the familiar scent of lavender soap. He said nothing that night, but suspicions began to spread like weeds in his mind. Their lives continued like this for a few weeks. Ethan kept trying, but it was like trying to hold water between his fingers. Claire slipped through his attempts to rekindle the flame, and he didn't know what else to do. She continued to go out to meetings, dinners, events that he was not invited to attend, and he increasingly felt like a spectator, watching from afar as her life unfolded before his eyes, without him being able to do anything about it. Part of it. There was a moment, however, that Ethan couldn't get out of his head. It was during a Sunday breakfast. They were sitting at the table, and Claire was more distracted than usual, looking at her cell phone and answering messages. He watched her for a while, and when he finally asked who she was, she jumped, as if she had been caught doing something wrong. "It's just a friend from the art group," she replied quickly, putting her phone in her bag. Ethan smiled, trying not to look suspicious, but something in his expression said he wasn't convinced. Claire noticed, and for the first time in weeks, she stopped and looked him in the eyes. "Babe, are you worried about something?" she asked, but before he could answer, she changed the subject, got up to wash the dishes and went to the studio, leaving him there, alone with his thoughts. Ethan was trying to convince himself that everything was fine. He loved Claire, and part of loving someone is trusting, believing that the other person wouldn't do anything to hurt you. But the discomfort was growing, a bitter feeling that something was wrong, and he couldn't shake it. He felt that no matter how hard he tried, something was slipping out of his hands. And deep down, I knew that the truth was a shadow that, sooner or later, would reveal itself. Ethan felt like there was something brewing in the air, a silent storm that he couldn't yet see but knew was approaching. In the days that followed, the distance between him and Claire seemed greater than ever. She continued to be absent, always with different excuses, and he struggled to find a way to bring back the woman he loved, the woman who, not so long ago, seemed so present, so passionate. The dinners he tried to organize ended up being monotonous, filled with vague conversations and forced smiles. He could feel that she was there in body, but her mind was far away, lost somewhere he couldn't reach. One of those nights, Ethan decided he could no longer ignore his instincts. He needed answers, and if Claire wasn't willing to tell him the truth, he would have to find them on his own. So, when she left for another one of those late-night meetings, he decided to follow her. It was desperate, perhaps invasive, but he felt he had no choice. If he was losing control of his life, he needed to at least understand why. He saw her hurry out, wearing a black dress that he didn't remember seeing before, her hair tied up in an elegant way, as if she were going to some important event. Ethan followed her to her car, keeping a safe distance, and then drove behind her, his hands sweating on the steering wheel, his heart beating faster with every mile he drove. Claire wasn't going to a studio or a casual meeting with friends. She drove through busy streets and entered a neighborhood he knew well, an area full of upscale restaurants and bars. When she parked in front of a fancy restaurant, Ethan parked the car on a corner where he could watch her without being seen. He saw Claire get out of the car, straighten her dress and check her makeup in a small mirror before getting in. It all seemed meticulously planned, and, for the first time, Ethan realized that perhaps the answers he would find there were not the ones he wanted. He waited a few minutes before getting out of the car, and, with calculated steps, entered the restaurant. The ambience was sophisticated, with soft music playing in the background and a welcoming aroma of spices. Ethan looked around, searching for Claire among the tables. It didn't take long to find her, sitting at a table near the window, facing a man he didn't know. They were talking, laughing, and Claire looked relaxed, more relaxed than he had seen her in months. Something about the way she looked at the man, the way she smiled, made Ethan's stomach turn. He got close enough to hear bits of the conversation, keeping hidden behind a column. They spoke intimately, casually, with a familiarity that shouldn't exist. The man touched her hand on the table, and she didn't flinch. On the contrary, she held his hand, intertwining their fingers, and smiled as if that touch was all she needed at that moment. Ethan felt a pang in his chest, as if someone had just ripped the ground out from under his feet. Unable to control himself, he took a step forward, trying to find an explanation for that. But there was no explanation that made sense, no words he could use to justify what he was seeing. He thought about getting out of there, but his legs wouldn't obey. Something inside him wanted to see more, wanted confirmation that, deep down, he already knew was there. So, he stayed. Claire leaned closer to the man, and Ethan watched as she ran her hand through his hair, laughing softly at something he said. She looked happy. And that happiness was like a knife to Ethan. Everything he had done, every attempt to fix something he didn't even know was broken, it all seemed in vain. There, before his eyes, was the truth he feared so much. Claire wasn't just distant, she was with someone else. "I miss you," he heard the man say, his voice low and soft. Claire smiled, and Ethan saw tears glisten in her eyes. "I feel it too," she replied, and in that moment, it became clear that this wasn't a simple friendship or a passing fling. This was something that had been happening for a long time, something they had been keeping hidden, protected from reality. Ethan stayed there for a few more seconds, observing in silence, absorbing every gesture, every smile, as if he wanted to record it in his mind forever. He didn't know if he was feeling angry, sad, or just empty. It was as if his world was falling apart, piece by piece, and he couldn't do anything to stop it. Finally, when he thought he couldn't take it anymore, Ethan turned and walked out of the restaurant, his legs shaking and his head throbbing. He got into the car but couldn't drive. He simply sat there, silently, staring at the steering wheel as a storm of emotions unfolded inside him. The tears came, burning his cheeks, but he ignored them. He knew that when he returned home, he would have to face Claire and pretend that nothing had happened, at least for a little while longer. He needed a plan, he needed to decide how he was going to deal with this. That night, when Claire returned home, she found Ethan in the kitchen, sitting with a glass of whiskey in his hand, his gaze distant. She smiled, trying to hide her nervousness, and asked how his day had been. "It was long," he replied, without looking at her. And then something in his voice made her hesitate. Claire approached, trying to touch his arm, but he gently moved away, without saying anything else. She didn't know that he already knew. And he, in silence, decided that he would keep that truth for one more night. But in that moment, Ethan realized that as much as it hurt, as much as the betrayal was a crushing weight on his chest, he still hadn't seen everything. There was still something he didn't know, something that was behind that relationship that Claire tried so hard to hide. And he would find out, no matter what. Ethan didn't sleep the night he discovered the betrayal. He lay awake, tossing and turning, his head filled with thoughts that were spinning in circles. He tried to find some point of escape, a way out of that unbearable pain, but all he saw was the image of Claire, smiling at another man, touching his face with a tenderness that, until recently, seemed reserved only for Ethan. He didn't know what hurt more, the fact that she had betrayed his trust, or the natural way she seemed to be someone else when she was with this man. The next day, he decided he couldn't wait any longer. He had spent enough time trying to understand, trying to fix it, and now all he wanted were answers. It took all his strength to act like nothing was happening when Claire left once again to meet friends, as she used to say. But this time, Ethan didn't just follow her, he decided he was going to confront her. He waited for Claire to enter a luxurious hotel before parking the car and leaving. As he crossed the lobby, Ethan's heart was beating fast, his hands were sweating. He could barely breathe properly, and he felt like he was walking into a nightmare from which he couldn't wake up. But he didn't hesitate, he went ahead and stopped in front of the elevator. Upon entering, tension took over his body, but his determination was greater than his fear. The elevator took him to the top floor. He knew that Claire would be in one of the suites, and with the card he had obtained by bribing one of the hotel staff, he entered the silent hallway, where only the sound of her boots against the carpet echoed. Whatever he found there would change everything, but he was prepared for it. And then he saw it. At the end of the hallway, the door to the suite where Claire was. He stepped forward, hesitating only for a second before unlocking the door. The room was dark, but he could see the reflection of light coming from the window that revealed Claire and the man she was with in the restaurant. They were standing, talking heatedly, and didn't notice when Ethan entered. He closed the door quietly, moving closer, until finally the sound of the door locking made them look at him. "Ethan!" Claire exclaimed in surprise, her eyes wide with shock. She didn't expect to see him there. The man next to her, whose face was partially covered by shadow, turned, and Ethan could finally see his expression of discomfort turn into a restrained smile. "So it's you," Ethan murmured, his eyes locking onto the man. "The man she left me for." "Wait, Ethan, it's not what you think." Claire started to speak, her voice shaking, but he raised his hand, silencing her. "It is not?" he asked, looking directly at her. "Because all I see is you here, with him, after all the lies. And I want to know the truth, now. I want to know why you did this." Claire hesitated, tears forming in her eyes. The man next to her seemed impassive, as if he was waiting for the storm to pass. But Ethan didn't want any more hesitation, he didn't want any more excuses. "Do you really think she chose to be here?" the man said, his voice low but firm. "Ethan, it's not like you're imagining." He took a step forward, and Ethan stepped back for a moment, surprised by the man's confidence in such a delicate situation. "She was manipulated, and I used that to get to you." Ethan blinked, confused. "What are you talking about?" The man smiled coldly, finally showing his true character. "I'm what you would call an investor. And Claire, well, she was my access to you. I needed information from you, about your company, your business, and she was the perfect bridge to get what I wanted." "Are you crazy?" Ethan turned to Claire, seeking confirmation. "That is true." Claire covered her face with her hands, as if she was trying to disappear. She took a deep breath before speaking, her voice breaking. "Yes, Ethan. But I didn't know at first. I swear. He got close to me when I started going to an art gallery, and we became close. I thought it was something real, until he started asking for things. Information about you, about your contracts. When I realized, I was already too involved, and I didn't know how to get out." Ethan was silent for a moment, trying to process what he had just heard. "So he didn't love you. And you let all this happen?" His voice was filled with disbelief and pain. "You lied to me, cheated our lives for this?" Claire sobbed, trying desperately to explain herself. I was lost, Ethan. I didn't know what to do. I thought he loved me, I thought there might be something different, something I wasn't feeling anymore, and, suddenly, he was asking for things, and I knew that if I said no, everything we had, he threatened to expose everything. Ethan felt the ground disappear beneath his feet. Expose what? The man gave a short, almost sarcastic laugh. Your relationship was on the rocks, Ethan, and Claire was trying to fill a void. When I realized how vulnerable she was, I knew I could use her for my purposes. She gave me access to her confidential contracts, information worth millions. And now, you can imagine what I'm going to do with this. You manipulated her, and that's why she destroyed our marriage. Ethan felt his anger rising, but it was like a contained volcano, ready to explode. What do you want from me? Ethan asked, staring at the man, his eyes flashing with anger. Because if you think you're going to get away with this, you're sorely mistaken. Ah, Ethan. It's simple. He said, shrugging with a disturbing calmness. You're going to sign a contract that allows me full access to a portion of your business. Or I release all the information I've gathered and your reputation will be destroyed. Claire will be dragged along, of course, but it's a small price to pay, don't you think? Ethan froze. This was all a scheme, a web of lies built to destroy him, and he hadn't even suspected it. He looked at Claire, hoping to find some strength, but she looked devastated, completely defeated. I never wanted it to go this far, she whispered. But I didn't know what else to do. The truth, finally exposed, was like a stab in Ethan's chest. He had been betrayed in every way possible, and the woman he loved had become a pawn in a dirty game, played by someone who was willing to do anything to get what he wanted. But he also knew that, no matter how much it hurt, he needed to find a way out of this situation. Not just for him, but to end that cycle of lies and manipulations. Do you think you can blackmail me? Ethan said, with a coldness he didn't even know he had. Do you think everything you've done will force me to give in? I've already lost enough, and I won't let you destroy any more. The man smiled again, confidently. That's what we're going to see. And in that moment, Ethan knew he was ready to fight. He would not surrender, and would do whatever was necessary to unmask that scheme. But one thing was certain, that betrayal was not the end. It was just the beginning of a battle he couldn't lose. The silence that took over the room after the revelation seemed even more deafening than any clash of words. Ethan remained standing, motionless, his eyes fixed on the man who had concocted this entire plot. The pain of betrayal was now mixed with cold, controlled anger, and he knew that any sudden movement could trigger something even worse. He needed to think, find a way to turn the tide, to make that man pay for what he did and, at the same time, protect everything he had built. Claire seemed huddled in a corner of the suite, her eyes still red from crying, but her face was a mask of helplessness and regret. Everything she had done, every lie that had unfolded over those months, was now in front of her, exposing every flaw, every wrong decision. And as much as she tried to find an excuse, a reason to justify her actions, all she could see was the extent of her actions reflected in Ethan's blank stare. That man she loved, who had always been her safe haven, was now further away than ever. The man, impassive and full of confidence, nodded, almost as if he was studying Ethan's expression. "You're an intelligent man, Ethan," he began, in a voice that sounded almost lecturing. "You know that any attempt to fight it will only make things worse for you. I have all the cards in my hands. So why not make things easier for all of us and accept what I'm proposing?" Ethan looked at him, every muscle in his body tense, but there was something in Claire's eyes that made him hesitate. She was on the verge of despair, and for the first time, he realized that it wasn't just the situation she had gotten herself into. There was something deeper, a guilt that seemed to eat away at her insides. She tried to speak, but her voice cracked, as if the words were too heavy to speak. "Why her?" Ethan finally asked, looking away from Claire for a moment before returning to the man. "You could have tried to reach me in many ways, but you chose to use Claire. Why? Because I knew she would give in, he replied, without blinking, as if it were the simplest thing in the world. She was dissatisfied, lost, looking for something you couldn't offer. I just offered her an opportunity, and she grabbed it with both hands. He shrugged, as if the whole matter were trivial. It was easy, Ethan. You made everything easy by trusting too much, by not seeing the cracks in your own house. His words were like a blow, and Ethan needed a moment to catch his breath. Every part of him wanted to react, but he knew he needed to stay calm, think clearly. And now? He asked, his voice firm. You expect me to sign a contract and pretend this never happened? Exactly, the man replied, with a cold smile. You sign, I take a part of your business, and we guarantee that all this is resolved without scandals. No destruction of your reputation, no complicated legal proceedings. Just a business, profitable for everyone. For a moment, the room was silent as Ethan absorbed every word. He looked at Claire, trying to find some clue as to what she really wanted, but all he saw was a broken woman, someone who seemed to have lost her way and was at the mercy of the consequences of her own mistakes. Do you really think I'm going to accept this? He said, his eyes burning with determination. Do you think I'm going to give in to this blackmail? The man took a step forward, his expression defiant. The question is not what you want, Ethan. It's what you're willing to sacrifice to avoid a greater disaster. And then Claire finally spoke up, her voice low, almost a whisper. Please don't do this, she said, her voice cracking with emotion. I know what I did is unforgivable, but don't let it destroy you. Not because of me. She approached Ethan, hesitantly, as if asking for permission to be there. I was weak, I was stupid, but I can't bear to see you pay for something that was my fault. Ethan looked at her for a long time, trying to understand what was left of the woman he loved. He wanted to hate her, wanted to blame her for all the pain he was feeling, but there was something about the way she was there, exposed, vulnerable, that reminded him of the Claire he'd met years ago, the woman who laughed at his side. Side in which he believed he knew so well. You don't understand, Claire, he said, his voice softer but still filled with pain. It's not just about what you did. It's about how you allowed him to come into our lives, to use us as pawns in a game I didn't even know we were playing. I trusted you, and you stabbed me in the back. Tears ran down her face, and she nodded, taking each word as a stab. I know, and I deserve it, she murmured. But please don't let him win. I will do whatever it takes to make this right, even if it means destroying myself in the process. Ethan shook his head, a mix of anger and sadness flooding his chest. You've already destroyed yourself, Claire, he said, his voice full of bitterness. And now I need to decide if it's worth destroying myself together. The man observed the entire scene, an expression of satisfaction on his face, as if he knew he had achieved what he wanted. So what's it going to be, Ethan? He asked, with disturbing calm. Sign the contract and we all leave here with what we want. Or we can continue this useless battle and let everything fall apart. There was a moral dilemma brewing, a weight Ethan wasn't sure how to deal with. He knew that giving in meant betraying his own principles, accepting defeat in a dirty game. But fighting meant risking losing everything, not just for himself but also for those who depended on him. And Claire, as sorry as she was also part of that complicated equation. I'm going to fight, Ethan finally said, his voice firmer than it had ever been. I won't let you destroy what I built, and much less will I allow you to get away with it after all this. If that means I have to face a battle, so be it. But I will not bow down to you. The man's expression hardened, confidence beginning to crack. You're making a mistake, Ethan, he warned, almost as if he was genuinely concerned. I am much more powerful than you know. Maybe, Ethan replied, looking straight at him, determination shining in his eyes. But what you underestimated was my willingness to fight. And that, I guarantee, will be your undoing. Claire watched everything in silence, anguish written all over her face, knowing that any hope of redemption was slipping through her fingers. She knew Ethan was prepared to do whatever it took, and she feared what that would mean for both of them. But in that moment, she also realized something that until then had seemed distant. He wasn't just fighting for his business, he was fighting for himself, for everything that had been taken from him in such a cruel and treacherous way. And so, the tension increased, setting the stage for the final clash. That hotel room, which had been the scene of so many lies, was about to become the battlefield where everything would be decided. And no one would get out of there unscathed. Ethan's decision to fight brought an immediate change to the atmosphere in that room. For the first time, the man who had manipulated Claire didn't seem so confident. He realized that despite all the tricks, Ethan would not be intimidated. And Ethan, in turn, knew he was entering a war that would go beyond any business dispute. It was a battle for his own dignity, a way to prove that, even in the face of the worst betrayals, he could still stand. The next day, Ethan gathered his lawyers and devised a plan to fight back. He knew that his opponent had made a fatal mistake by underestimating his determination. Using the documents Claire had provided and the information he had gathered, Ethan uncovered a series of fraudulent transactions that directly implicated the man. Not only that, but he found legal loopholes that could compromise his rival's entire operation and put him in financial and legal trouble. It was a risk, but one he was willing to take. While Ethan was plotting his defense, Claire was in a state of utter despair. The consequences of her choices hit her full force, and with each passing day she felt the crushing weight of her own guilt. She knew Ethan no longer trusted her, and although he had protected her from public exposure to prevent further harm, their relationship was irrevocably destroyed. Claire tried to get closer, to try to ask for forgiveness, but Ethan was direct. "I can't forgive you for this, Claire. You chose a path that destroyed us, and I can't erase what you did." His words were like a sentence. Claire realized that there was nothing else to do there. She packed up her things and left the home they had shared for so many years, knowing that that chapter of her life had come to a bitter and irreversible end. She moved to a small apartment away from everything, trying to rebuild her life, but every step was a painful reminder of what she had lost. The world she knew had fallen apart, and now, she needed to learn to live with the consequences of her choices. Meanwhile, Ethan was moving forward with his plan. Through a combination of legal action and careful exposure of his rival's fraud, he managed to turn the situation in his favor. The investigation revealed that the man had not only manipulated Claire, but several other people in similar situations, creating a network of shady businesses to enrich himself at the expense of others. When the evidence came to light, his image as a confident and ruthless businessman crumbled. Ethan made sure everything was documented and revealed publicly, ensuring that his rival had nowhere to escape. The opponent's fall was quick and brutal. The contracts he had obtained through blackmail were voided, his company's shares plummeted, and he was forced to face a lawsuit that quickly escalated into a criminal charge of fraud and extortion. The people he had manipulated, including Claire, were called to testify, and he found himself alone with no allies. The confidence and arrogance he displayed at the beginning were gone, replaced by quiet desperation as he tried to free himself from the charges. For Ethan, victory did not come without a cost. He had saved his business, but the price was high. He lost the woman he loved, and although he freed himself from the threat of his rival, the scars of that betrayal would remain with him. Still, he knew he needed to move on. Life wouldn't be the same, but he refused to be defined by what happened. He made difficult decisions, walked away from what he knew, and rebuilt his company and his life, determined to find a new purpose beyond the pain he had experienced. Time passed, and Claire was eventually called to testify during the trial. She told the truth, admitted her guilt and the way she was manipulated, and her confession helped to bring down her opponent's scheme once and for all. But in doing so, she finally got something she had searched for a long time, a sense of responsibility, the courage to face her mistakes and do something to make amends for them, even if it was too late to salvage what she had with Ethan. When the verdict was announced and the man was sentenced, Ethan felt a mixture of relief and sadness. He was not the type to celebrate the ruin of others, but he knew that this was the justice that needed to be done. Claire, on the other hand, left the courtroom with tears in her eyes, knowing that no matter how hard she had tried to repair the damage, some wounds would simply never heal. She began to live more simply, away from the spotlight, trying to find a new reason to move forward, knowing that that experience had changed her life forever. Ethan returned to focusing on his business, and although he bore the scars of everything he had been through, he also found new strength. He learned that trust is a precious gift and that sometimes the people you love can make mistakes that change everything. But he also understood that life is about learning, rebuilding, and moving forward, even when it seems impossible. And so, the story ended with each of the characters following different paths, but inevitably marked by what happened. Claire never found the same kind of happiness she had with Ethan, and the man who manipulated her ended up behind bars, paying for every lie and manipulation. And Ethan, despite everything, managed to find a new way to live, to rise from the ashes and prove that, even in the worst situations, it is possible to find a way back to yourself. So, what did you think of this story of betrayal, manipulation, and revenge? Tell us in the comments and share your opinion. And don't forget to subscribe to the channel for more stories like this. Remember, here we show how betrayal destroys lives, and at no point do we support this type of behavior. Until next time.